Okay, welcome to the Government Review. I also want to welcome those of you watching via webcam. All right. What the plan is to work our way through this sample test. Certainly these exact questions will not be on the test, but it will remind us, oh yeah, I need to go back and study the major theories of how power works in a democracy because it's been so long. All right, so it'll sort of remind us what to review more than anything. And it'll also give me a chance to give you multiple choice advice. All right, one of the major themes is going to be eliminate the ones you know aren't true and take a good guess. All right, so I want to start with all the questions that are labeled 1-3, meaning they're from early in the year. And I actually want to start with 10, and then we'll go back to number 2, I think. So we're going to start with 10, because it says the theory that all interests are and should be free to compete for influence in government, resulting in healthy democratic compromise and balance, is called. Okay, the answer I think is pluralism. But it does remind me that we said, okay, here's what democracy is. Here are some different kinds of democracy, and then here are different theories about who actually wields power. Okay, so let's write down or remember at least a couple of different ideas. Remember, we have a concept called pure or direct democracy, in which democracy means, rule by the people, in which the people actually make policy. All right? And, of course, that's not what we have. And there's all these reasons we don't have it. It's inefficient on a large scale. It's hard to get all those people to vote. It's hard to get them all to become educated about policy. It's time-consuming to set up ballot stations every time you want to vote. There are a bunch of obvious reasons why this is a little bit impractical. Okay? But it is the most democratic. Its advantage is, if you value rule by the people, it is the people making policy. Okay? Real quick, there are some instances of direct democracy in the United States. Anytime we give the people a chance to actually choose yes or no on a policy. We have what we call a ballot initiative. Where usually it involves some kind of petition or something, where the people place a policy decision on a ballot. This usually happens at the state level. This never happens at the national level. The people petition, and California puts on its ballot, should we, I don't know, make new rules for people who raise chickens to make the chickens happier, and they vote yes or no. So that's direct democracy. They're actually making chicken policy. All right? We also have, I don't know if this counts as direct democracy, but there also is what is called a recall vote. That is a special, as long as we're talking about special types of votes, that's a special type of vote to recall a politician to, I don't know, so the governor of California a few years ago was subject to a recall vote, and people voted to take him out of office. All right? And then we also have a situation where the lawmakers say, well, let's ask the people if they want this law. Let's refer to the people. And that's called a referendum. Let's refer to the people and see what they think. So they'll say, some state constitutions require this. They require their state government to if they want to raise taxes in a certain way, to make sure it's okay with the people through a referendum first. It's direct democracy. So I guess this one and this one are direct democracy. The people are making policy. This one's just a weird electoral quirk that, I don't know, I thought of just now. Okay? But we don't have direct democracy for the most part, especially at the national level. We have representative democracy. We have representative democracy, in which the people do elect, but they elect representatives to make law, to make policy on their behalf. It's more efficient because we don't have to have as many elections. We just have an election to elect a legislature, and they make policy as time goes by. Those legislatures can be specialize in lawmaking and be well educated on policy more so than the average person. So there are advantages. There are disadvantages. It's more elitist. Those people then are elites. And so we're being governed by elites as opposed to truly, purely governed by the people. Okay? So you want to look over the advantages and disadvantages here, because I'm sure there are others that we're going to skip past. Also, we do have a democracy. We do have a representative democracy. But just a quick reminder, what are the only bodies, what are the only offices at the national level that were actually directly elected by the people when the Constitution was first written? Because that's a very common concept the AP test likes. All right? Because they try to trick you into saying senators, and it's not senators. Now we directly elect senators. That's why it's a trick. But we didn't originally. Originally, let me run through the branches. Judges have never been elected at the national level. They've always been appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. So we say they're indirectly chosen. The people choose the president chooses the judges. But even the president is indirectly chosen because the people vote for electors in the Electoral College who then choose the president. So even he's not directly elected. So we got, and then the bureaucrats are bureaucrats. They are hired as opposed to being elected. Judges aren't elected. Bureaucrats aren't elected. The president is indirectly elected. So we get to Congress and we have the Senate and the House. The House, representatives in the House are the only body that was originally, it's the only office that was originally directly elected by the people. It's one of the reasons it has special tax authority. The tax legislation has to start in the House because they wanted the chamber closest to the people to be the one that could tax them. And another thing that makes them closer to the people is their 2-year terms. They have to be responsive to the people because of the threat of re-election is always looming. All right. In the Senate, originally they were chosen by state legislatures. There's 2 senators per state, and the state government would choose their 2 senators. So maybe the people chose the state government, and then the state government chooses the 2 senators, but that's indirect. All right. And I believe the 17th Amendment changed it to direct election of senators. And I think you ought to know the first 10 amendments, maybe not the 7th, nobody cares about that. But I think you ought to know the first 10 amendments, and then the 17th is one of those other amendments you should know. There's a few more, there's 13, 14, 15, we'll work on those later. All right, now, back to the issue at hand. If we do have a democracy, the purest kind of democracy, I guess, is the majority rules. You can't have all the people agreeing all the time, so the majority rules. And that's known as majoritarian politics. So the purest kind of democracy is majoritarian politics. Majoritarian politics. And that's not necessarily good. It sounds good. Oh, the majority rules. But you got to keep in mind, what if the majority chooses to abuse the minority? What if the majority is one religion and they say, okay, our religion's the official one, and if you're from our religion, you don't have to pay taxes, and if you're not, you do. So the majority could abuse the minority, but that is maybe the starting point for these theories of who actually holds power. In theory, the majority holds power in a democracy. Who really does, though? All right, so there's 4 views on who holds power in a democracy. All right, and some of those are referenced in this question. You have a view that says the elite hold power. Sometimes they call that the elite view or the power elite view. But this question calls it the elite power politics view. So you have the elitist view that says basically there's some elites that hold real power. High-level government officials, high-level military officials, high-level media barons, high-level corporate officers. The rich, the powerful, hold real power, not the people. All right, that's kind of a pessimistic view, but some people have that view, and to some degree, it's probably right. All right, another view is the Marxist view. Remember, Marxist focus. And people who are Marxists, their focus is on controlling the means of production. And so all of history is about a struggle for the control of the means of production. And so they think, well, whoever controls the means of production, whoever owns the capital, the factories, the land, whoever owns that stuff has actual power. Because Marx was kind of an economist, so his focus was on the economy. Whoever controls the economy controls the government. And he would say in the United States, it's the capitalists, it's the corporatists, corporations. And he would want it to be the laborers, the proletariat. All right? Another view is the bureaucratic view, which basically says, yeah, you can, your lawmakers, they have power to make laws, but it's the people carrying out those laws at the ground level that actually have power. They get to give special exceptions to their pals, or get to choose how to enforce it and when to enforce the law, and that'd be the bureaucrats. So they would say the bureaucrats that carry out the law have real power. I mean, I'm a bureaucrat, and they can make all the the laws they want about how education is supposed to be in Texas, but what happens in the classroom is sort of up to the bureaucrat here standing here teaching, right? So that's a bureaucratic view. And then, of course, the other view is the most optimistic one, which is pluralism, which says, you know what? There is a struggle to control the means of production, and a struggle for power in the bureaucracy. And the elites may exercise power, but if your government is big enough, there'll be so many competing influences, they will sort of offset each other, and no specific group will dominate. And so democracy will kind of work. All right? But it's pretty optimistic, right? It assumes a lot of things. All right, so what's the answer to this one? The theory that all interests are and should be free to compete for influence in government, resulting in healthy democratic compromise and balance, because no single group can dominate, they have to compromise, is pluralism. Socialism is related to Marxism. Rational choice is basically using economics in a government class. That's not on the test. Or it is a fake answer. And then institutionalism is not the right answer either. All right, so it's obviously... Let's go backwards then to number 2. Number 2 references the Constitutional Convention and all these different problems that the framers of the Constitution were facing. All right? They had to make all kinds of different balances. How do we empower the majority but protect the minority? How do we make a national government that's strong enough to be effective and not weak like the Articles of Confederation government, but not too strong so it's going to abuse our liberties? How do we empower the people, but we don't trust them to make wise decisions? How do we empower the people, but still sort of keep them from making poor decisions and give real decision-making power to the elite? How do we balance the power among the 3 different branches of government without making a single branch of government too powerful? How do we ensure separation of powers? All right. There are all these problems they were facing. What do we do about slavery? And their answer to that was put it off until 1808, and because it's too controversial right now. There's a number of issues. So you want to look up all those issues that the framers of the Constitution were facing, because those are such big picture issues. I suspect that they make it on the test a lot. Right. And then one of the major ones that's right here on the second question on the test is the big states versus the small states. Okay, because under the Articles of Confederation, each state, regardless of size, got 1 vote. And by size, we mean population size. Each state got 1 vote, so a state with a small population got the same 1 vote in the legislature as a state with a large population. So, should we stick with that? Of course, the small states, like New Jersey, said, yes, that was the New Jersey plan, was our legislature under this new Constitution should look just like it did under the Articles of Confederation, 1 vote per state. Of course, that favors the small state. 1 vote in the legislature, so 1 human in the legislature casting a vote per state. The large states said, no, there's more of us. That's not fair. It's not fair for 500 people in this state to get the same vote as 500,000 people in another state. So they wanted representation in legislature to be based on population. So you could say proportional to population. And that was the Virginia plan. And it makes sense because Virginia at the time, it's still a pretty big population state. So what did they decide to do? Well, that's what this question is asking. They decided to compromise. The Great or Connecticut Compromise was, let's sort of do both. Let's have the House of Representation be based on population. And let's have the Senate not be 1 vote per state, but 2 votes per state. Okay? That's still what we do. So let's go through the answers and see if there are any that are deceptive or problematic. All revenue bills originate in the Senate. Revenue is code word for tax, right? That's how the government makes revenues. So this is wrong on its face. All revenue bills have to start in the House, the chamber closest to the people. They're the ones getting taxed. All judicial appointments to be nominated by the president. That's true. That's not the right answer. The elimination of importation of slaves. They definitely avoided that issue. That's why we had to fight a civil war. Of course, we might not have had the Constitution if they had directly addressed slavery. An electoral college and rules for the removal of the president. We have those things, but that's not the compromise. The compromise was a bicameral, which means 2-chamber or 2-house legislature with 1 houses. Look how they lowercase to the H, because they're both houses. You would uppercase the H if it was the House of Representatives. You lowercase it if you're referring to either one. One house is composition based on state population, and another is on equal state representation. All right, so I think the answer is E. You guys remember how many votes they decided they needed to ratify the Constitution? How many states had to be on board? Should have been unanimous. According to the rules under the Articles of Confederation, to amend the Articles, or in this case to throw them out and adopt a new one, they needed a unanimous consent of the states. So that's why I think that's why the framers said, "Oh yeah, we're not going to vote, have state legislatures vote on this because we would need unanimous consent. We're going to have special state conventions held, and we only need 9 of those," as Trevor said. And the reason for 9 was it's kind of close to 3/4, which is, by the way, what we need today to ratify an amendment to the Constitution is 3/4 of the states. But also because if it was only 8, the 8 northern states could force it on the 5 southern states. So it was 9, so the southern states would have some sort of influence. All right? Otherwise, the whole thing might have fallen apart without the South on board. But because of them, we never had any north-south problems ever again. All right? Now, 17. Enumerated powers of the federal government include all the following except. So remember, that's the way our federalism works in theory. Maybe not in practice, but in theory, we enumerate, which means number, or numerate, name, list, a bunch of powers for the federal government, for Congress, in Article 1, and then we say all other powers belong to the states. And in case you didn't know that, they go ahead and specifically say that in the 10th Amendment. Any powers not given to the national government and prohibited to the states go to the states. Okay? So, what's on the list of enumerated powers? Remember, enumerated means national only. So you need a feel for, need some examples of some enumerated powers. Everything else is reserved for the states, so we say those are reserved powers. So it's everything else. My favorite example is education. Police powers, like that have to do with public health and safety and welfare. It doesn't just have to do with policing, but those are called police powers. Those are up to the states. Those are reserved for the states. By the way, my example helps me on this test. We'll see later. And then, if it's a power that both of them sort of have, it's called a concurrent power. Is that right? I hope so. Concurrent powers, like they both can tax, and they both can have courts, and they both can build roads. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have turned the camera. Which one of these is not an enumerated power? All right. So the national government can coin money. We know that. We use it all the time. The national government can declare war. That's a Congress power. You know the president's the commander-in-chief. Regulating interstate commerce, which means between the states, across state lines, is kind of the main way Congress makes laws, right? It's their main justification for making laws. It was their justification for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Obamacare Act. And the court said, well, you can't do it because of that, but you can do it because of the power to tax. They can certainly do that. They can certainly tax. But regulating intrastate commerce within state borders is technically up to the states. Now, Congress has been allowed by the courts to make laws regulating any activity that is substantially affects interstate commerce, even if it does happen within state borders, since the New Deal and the switch in time that saved 9. All right. If we don't find a question about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, we need to make sure to talk about them before we go. I bet we find one. Now, this next question is about a bunch of protections already in the Constitution. That before the Bill of Rights was even added, there were some protections already in the Constitution. A lot of them have weirdo Latin names. For example, there could be no religious requirement to hold office. That was kind of a religious protection in the Constitution before we even added the First Amendment, with the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. All right, well, that's not on this list. We'll answer the question in a second. What are all the protections we already have in the original unamended Constitution? We have protection from a bill of attainder. That's not allowed. The way I summarize that is a law that punishes somebody without a trial. So it could say, no, this crime is so bad you don't even get a trial. Well, that would be a bill of attainder. An ex post facto petition, I don't know what that means. Let's say it said ex post facto law. That is an after the fact law. That is also not allowed. We're also protected from that. That would be a law that punishes you retroactively. That reaches back into the past, something you did in the past, it punishes you for it, even if when you did it, it wasn't illegal. All right? Like if they make drinking energy drinks illegal because it's so bad for you. They can't punish you for having one today if they make the law next year, because that would be an ex post facto law, after the fact law. All right? Writ of certiorari is actually not a protection in the original Constitution. We learned just recently that's the way that the Supreme Court declares we will hear your case. They grant certiorari through this writ, which means note. Habeas corpus literally means give us the body. Corpus means body. It's your right to ask a judge to appear before him and have your charges explained to you. If you don't have habeas corpus, that means you can be locked up with no charge. The government just doesn't like you or is suspicious of you. They're afraid you might commit a crime. Well, we are protected from that, from the government locking us up so we won't commit a crime in the future. Because we can ask a judge, hey, my body wants to appear before you. All right? And then an amicus curiae brief is a legal term for a friend of the court brief. So, what does the question say? Which of the following is filed when an imprisoned person wants to be brought before a judge? That's habeas corpus. So that the judge can determine whether his or her imprisonment is illegal. And Abraham Lincoln famously suspended habeas corpus, imprisoned some rebel sympathizers, just to keep them from committing future crimes. It was unconstitutional. And you can totally get away with it during times of rebellion or invasion, according to Article 1. So Congress can do that, not the President. All right. In the Federalist Papers, James Madison argues that political liberty is best protected by, remember I tell you guys, you need to know the number and topic of 2 of the Federalist Papers. There's lots of them. You need to know number 10 is about factions, which is another way of saying interest groups. Federalist number 10 is about factions, because remember the Federalist Papers were arguments that we should ratify the new Constitution. And the Anti-Federalists said, no, we shouldn't. All right, and their main argument, by the way, was there's no Bill of Rights, is one of them. No Bill of Rights. We're afraid there's no Bill of Rights. Why isn't there a Bill of Rights? Madison would say, we don't need one. It tells exactly what the government's allowed to do. They can't do that other stuff. We don't need to specifically say that you're protected. Either way, the Federalist Papers argued for the Constitution. Number 10 was a response to anti-federalist concern about factions. What if a new strong central government allows a special interest group to use its resources to impose policy that's not really good for everybody else but is good for itself? And we have that problem today, special interest groups. And he said, well, if our government is big enough, if we have a big enough republic, remember they didn't create a democracy, right? They created a republic. If we have a big enough republic, there will be interest groups. Those are inevitable. We can't avoid them, and they are dangerous. But if men were angels, we wouldn't need government. So men aren't angels. They'll try to do this. And maybe he said that in 51. Either way, he said that somewhere. But either way, 10 was about factions, and if our republic is large enough, they will sort of compete for influence and offset each other. He was making a pluralist argument. And so let's see. More on that second. By the way, 51 is about separation of powers. Okay, he was arguing for separation of powers. Maybe that's where he said the thing about men or angels. I should know that. I forget. All right. Anyway, this one's really tempting. Madison argues that political liberty is protected by a written constitution. I bet he would argue that, but he doesn't. I don't know if he says that in the Federalist Papers or not. Let me read the other ones just to make sure there's not a good answer. The small republic, he didn't argue for a small republic, he argued for a big republic with lots of competing interests. A small democracy with a unitary government. Well, we don't have a parliamentary government system anyway. We don't have a unitary government. We didn't argue for a small democracy, argued for a large republic, so that's not right. Well-regulated militias controlled by state governments. That's the Second Amendment. That's part of the right to bear arms, and that's just not the right answer. Fragmentation of political power in a large republic. Having lots of groups competing for power in a large republic sounds very Madisonian and very much like the right answer. That does remind me, though, what's the difference between a unitary government and a federalist government? All right, so let me draw you a quick sketch. Remember, unitary is how most people think government really works, even though it doesn't. They think the national government is supreme. The states are allowed to exist because the national government gives them their authority. All right? And if the national government wanted to take it away, they could. But that's not what we have. That's a unitary government. That's what they have in some other countries. In the United States, we have a federalist system where the national government and the state governments are sovereign within their own spheres. They share power, okay? And they both get their power from the people. The people give power to both. All right? Of course, we have two different kinds of federalism. We have absolute separate powers for federalism, where they're each sovereign within their own sphere. They never cross over. And maybe that's what some people envision, but that's not how it really works. They often work together, their powers cross over, and the national government will often try to impose itself on a state power like education by saying, here's some money, here's some strings attached. Here's some money, we want these changes to your education laws. The states can always say, that's our power. This is federalism, that's our power. We reject the money and the strings attached. But most states want to say, oh, cool, free money. I can shower this on my constituents and not have to tax them. And so they take the money and they take the strings attached, and therefore the federal government sort of interferes with state powers. But the states seem to be okay with it, because they could say no. All right, let's go on. Okay, checks and balances. My advice to you, a good exercise would be 2 nights before the test. You don't want to do this the night before in case you can't come up with anything. Let's skip one.
I said, what is a bill of attainder?
Oh, I hope my explanation helped you answer it. Where is it?
27.
Oh, yeah. Okay, a bill passed by Congress that applies only to one individual. I don't know, maybe. A compromise bill passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate. That's just called the compromise version, right? They get together in a conference committee, which, by the way, we didn't do so great on remembering it was called a conference committee on one of our time writing. They do that in a conference committee, and they produce a compromise version. That's certainly not a bill of attainder. A decision by an executive branch, I don't know if that's wrong, right or not. A decision by an executive branch official that does not need to be approved by Congress. No, that maybe be a new regulation, because executive branch officials are bureaucrats, right? And they make policy through regulations. Maybe that's a regulation, I don't know. A law that declares that an action of an individual can be punished without a trial. That is a bill of attainder. That is a bill of attainder that says, this is a special crime that we don't have a trial if you do that. You don't get due process for that. So I like that. And then, I don't like bills of attainder, but that's the answer. Law that guarantees benefits to individuals who meet certain criteria. Okay? Okay, the next one is about checks and balances. I think it's a good exercise for you to sort of go the day before the test, go 2 days before the test in case you don't know what to do and you need to help, is to draw the 3 branches of government, the judicial branch, and the executive branch, and the legislative branch, and talk about how they check each other. You see if you can fill in at least one thing, one way the executive branch checks the judicial branch. Okay, this is pretty basic government 101. Okay, but government 102, AP Government says you should also throw the bureaucracy up here and talk about specific ways that each of these groups checks the bureaucracy, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe the bureaucracy checks them right back. Although the bureaucracy doesn't have any checks and balances authority for the most part. But you need to talk about how each one of them checks the bureaucracy. All right, you might throw the media up here. The media checks the legislature, the executive, and the judicial branch in some way, and also the bureaucracy. And how do they do that? It's through their watchdog function, through keeping an eye out for corruption. So it's a good idea to go over a complete picture of checks and balances and make sure you have tools in your toolbox to produce on the free response. All right, one example of constitutional checks and balances. This one throws me for a loop every year. Because I look at the first and I'm like, oh, it's got 2 answers because A tempts me. Yeah, we have one branch declaring war, and another branch is commander-in-chief, and a branch is in charge of military funds, and I always get thrown by A. I want to put A, but I'm wrong. Why is A wrong? Congress declares war, and the second part of it's right. Congress does appropriate military funds, pay for the military, but the president doesn't declare war, so that's just wrong on its face. The president nominates cabinet members. He does that. The House confirms. I don't think the House does any confirming of any humans. All right, the Senate does that, so that's just wrong. The House can impeach federal judges and the president. The Senate holds the impeachment trial. I think so, but let's say you're like, oh, I don't remember. Was it the other way around? Can they impeach judges? They can. So think, put a mark by that and be like, maybe. Congress can override the United States Supreme Court decision on the constitutionality of laws. Is there some sort of override for judicial review? No way. Presidential vetoes of laws can be overridden by a simple majority in both House and Senate. No, they needed a simple majority already to pass the law and get it to the president's desk. If he says, I veto this, it doesn't make sense to say, well, now all we need is a simple majority again, which we already have. No, now you need a bigger majority. What's bigger than a 1/2 plus 1 majority? A 2/3 majority. So, it's C. All right. Rolling now. Which of the following policies, I'm on number 41, which of the following policies involves more state spending than federal spending? So I'm sort of on the lookout. But when I first read this question, I was like, holy cow, I don't know the real spending numbers. Who knows that? Nobody. And I was like, oh no. I guess it's okay to miss one here and there. It's okay to miss several. But you should try to read through the choices and see if you can get every one of them right. All right? I have a sneaking suspicion the national government spends more on the military than states. We can have state militias. That's protected by the Second Amendment. But the national government spends a ton of money on Social Security. Do they hand it to the states and let them spend it? Maybe. Social Security is expensive. Ooh. Education is my classic example of a state power, right? The reserve power. I bet that's the answer. Because we're looking for more state influence than federal influence. Okay. Medicare is a national policy. Veterans Affairs related to the military, it's certainly a national deal. So the only one up there that's primarily national, or primarily a state power, is education. Although, does the national government interfere with education and spend money on education? Of course. Okay? So maybe you missed that one. I don't know. Okay. It's okay not to get a 60 out of 60. Okay, 42. And usually, by the way, as you work through the test, and this is really important, as you work through the test, the questions can get more challenging. So don't work backwards and don't skip around. Some people are like, yeah, this is just how I do it. I just skip around. Okay, that's great, but don't. Work from front, the number 1 to number 60. Because the simplest ones are at the beginning usually, and the more challenging, more complex ones are at the end, the ones that take the longest. What's worth more to your final grade, number 1 or number 60? They're the same, so why not get credit for the first one right at the beginning of the test? Because it's easy, and it takes 10 seconds. If you don't get to number 60, okay, you didn't get to one of the hardest questions that takes a long time. That's especially true in economics, by the way. All right? So we're getting into the more challenging ones. That doesn't mean we need to be intimidated, though. All the following Supreme Court decisions strengthen the power of the federal government. Remember, U.S. history, the general trend has been in our federalist system towards expanding national power and therefore relatively shrinking state power, right? That's been the general evolution. Although that trend has sort of shifted since 1995, and now we have a phenomenon called devolution, where more power is being shifted back from the national government to the states. But history says national government power is expanded. And a lot of our early court cases were about this relationship between the national government and the state government. How do they share power? And the trend there is, until 1995, the trend there is the national government wins these cases. The court rules in favor of national government power. So, Marbury v. Let's start at the top. Gibbons v. Ogden was about the Interstate Commerce Clause, where the national court ruled that the Interstate Commerce Clause allows Congress to regulate interstate commerce. This happened to be ferry travel between New York and New Jersey and conflicting permission and the national government's permission. was legitimate because they were regulating interstate commerce. So national government won there. Okay. That is about Marbury v. Madison, of course, established judicial review, which is the power of national courts. So I guess that expands national government power. Okay. Dred Scott v. Sanford. If only you had a teacher who had told you this week to go look that decision up. You should go look it up. I'll tell you what it is anyway, but you should go look it up. McCulloch v. Maryland was about, can the national government set up national banks? Yes, under the necessary and proper clause. And then, if they can the state sort of interfere with that bank by taxing it? And the answer was no, because you're interfering with a legitimate exercise of national power. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. If laws are made under the Constitution, like let's make a bank, and they conflict with your state laws, if there's ever any conflict between a legitimate exercise of constitutional authority, so if there's ever a conflict between the Constitution and the state policy, which one wins? The Constitution, because it's the supreme law of the land. We call that the supremacy clause. And both of those issues were in play in McCulloch v. Maryland. Korematsu versus the United States was a case that, I don't like the outcome, but it was a case where an executive order was issued by the president during World War II to round up Japanese American citizens of Americans that were of Japanese descent, and imprison them in case they were spies for our Japanese enemy in the internment camps. And of course, one of these guys sued, and it wasn't about expanding national power, or I guess it was, because they said the United States has the power to racially discriminate if they can prove a compelling governmental interest. That's called strict scrutiny, and otherwise they can't racially discriminate. So this established a standard called strict scrutiny, and it's too obscure and specific for your purposes, but that did expand the power of the national government. They said you can round up racial citizens and imprison them. Of course, we sort of changed our mind on that. The strict scrutiny we haven't changed our mind on. They said you do have a good we have changed our mind on whether that was a good reason to round up Japanese people and Japanese Americans and put them in prison. We decided national defense would probably not be a good enough reason. All right, so I think it's got to be Dred Scott. All right, remember Dred Scott is the reason to know it is because one of the only examples of, before 1995, of the state side winning, state power winning in court. Okay, what happened was, I guess Dred Scott's, he's a slave, his master takes him to Wisconsin territory or some kind of northern territory that was a free area. And under the Missouri Compromise, which is an act of Congress, an act of the national government, northern territories should be free and some southern territories weren't, and it all gets mixed up in my brain. I don't think anybody truly knows what happened. But either way, Dred Scott claims, I'm free now because of the Missouri Compromise, an act of the national government, and the court rules, no, you're not. We're going with the state policy of wherever you go, your master owns you. So the state policy sort of won. And that's very rare until 1995. When in U.S. v. Lopez, the broad interpretation of the Interstate Commerce Clause was narrowed. Okay. Which of the following forms of financial aid from the national government? So this is a question about fiscal federalism. Yikes. This is a question about fiscal federalism, so let's quickly review what that means. This is the idea that the national government gives the state governments money and also some sort of mandates, some strings attached, and it's a way for the national government to influence state powers. All right? There's they're called grants and aid. There's two major types. You have the very broad type, which is called a block grant. That gives the states lots of decision-making power, and by now you should know what decision-making power, what's our word for that? Discretion. That gives the states a lot of discretion, a lot of power in how to spend the money. And then we have categorical grants, but that just sounds more specific, categorical. Categorical grants are more specific, and they restrict state decision-making, state of discretion, and so restrict state power. And then, of course, one element of devolution is empowering the states by giving them block grants instead of categorical grants. And that happened in the 1990s with welfare, a very expensive federal spending program, and some credit that with helping us reduce the deficit then. But either way, does that help me with this question? Sometimes, by the way, the government won't even give any money. They'll just order the states to do something, and the states will have to follow without any money to help them do it. The Motor Voter Act in the 1990s was an example of that, where the national government ordered the states, you will allow people to register to vote when they get their driver's license and their welfare check. Because their goal was to allow more people to vote, to spread suffrage, I guess. To say, if you're going to require people to register, you need to make it easy for them. And they didn't give them any money to do that. All right, so wait a minute. Which of the following forms of financial aid from the national government gives the states the broadest discretion? Ho! All right. In the spending of money. But not that. Foreign aid is not, that goes to foreign countries. Unfunded mandates, there's no money there. Block grants are the discretion when military funding is not the right answer. All right, way to go. So this is a question about fiscal federalism. The national government using money to, it's not necessarily bad, I say interfere with state powers, but the states like having the money. It can be expensive. All right, 52. A prominent example of the process of returning more responsibilities of governing from the national level to the state level. What's this called, by the way, that it starts with a D? Devolution. Okay? And so this would be making categorical grants into block grants, or it might be welfare reform. It might be U.S. v. Lopez, where the history had said the Interstate Commerce Clause is a very broad power, and Congress can do almost anything and justify it as regulating interstate commerce. But in U.S. v. Lopez, they said, wait a minute, the Gun-Free School Zone Act, that's a good act, that's a legitimate policy, but that doesn't sound anything like interstate commerce. So they struck that down as unconstitutional because the guy brought a gun to school in San Antonio. He got punished for it. He was like, there shouldn't be a national law against this. That's not interstate commerce. I bet his lawyer thought of that. But either way, it started to narrow the interpretation of the interstate commerce. So all that's devolution. Immigration reform, trade reform, welfare. There we go. Remember, welfare is part of our entitlement system. There's 4 main entitlement programs you should know. Draw my quick grid. 4 main entitlement programs you should know. 2 of them are just money, and 2 of them are for medical bills. 2 of them are for the elderly, and then 2 of them are for low-income people. So what do we call money for old people that are retired? They paid in their whole lives, now they get Social Security. All right? Money for people with low incomes is welfare. You gotta have kids, technically. I don't know, but I think you gotta have kids. The medical program for the elderly is called Medicare. And then the medical program for the poor, the low income, is called Medicaid. And I always get those 2 confused, so I just have to come up with a way to remember them. I just remember Social Security and Medicare because they're both elements of something that comes out of your paychecks called FICA, F-I-C-A, Social Security and Medicare. So I guess Medicaid must be for low income. All right. And I think there's one more question, and I want to quickly talk about weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, unless this one happens to be about that. Oh! Ho! What do you know? All right. Under the Articles of Confederation, which of the following were true? Okay. Classic AP style question with the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4. And people hate these because they're weird, or you love them because they're awesome, because you can get away with not knowing the facts and still answer it right. Okay? Here's what I mean. Congress could not tax this. Let's answer it, and then I'll talk you through how I would have answered this, maybe even if I didn't know the answer. Congress could not tax the states directly. That's true. They had to sort of ask them for money. Right? That's an obvious weakness. And so that's true. The executive branch of government exercised more power than Congress. So, let's say you were like, ooh, I don't know. Maybe. This one's, I think, not true. by the way. The executive branch of...
Teachers and students, please pardon this interruption. There will be a bake sale immediately after school outside of the cafeteria
Stop
with
the
all
review. We'll
proceeds
come back
benefiting the
and bake
West
sale.
community.
Okay, the office of the president of the Articles of Confederation was so weak, the very first president didn't even show up. It was John Hancock. So this is actually not true. But let's say you didn't know. Let's say you're like, that Coach Beene never mentioned that in class. All right? Well, don't get too upset. Let's see if we can account for that. Congress was a unicameral body. I remember that. They had one legislature with one vote each, right? They didn't have any proportional House of Representatives in every state the same Senate. So I think that's true. So let me just look at the answers. Without even reading number 4, what can I eliminate? My answer has to have 1 and 3 in it. I can eliminate number 1. None of the other answers have 2 in it at all, do they? So it doesn't matter that we didn't know 2. Oh yeah, they do. But they don't have 1, and I know 1 is right. Good point. They don't have 1, and I know 1 is right. Agree? So I kind of like this. I didn't know the answer to number 2. I haven't even read number 4. It's got to be B, because I know 1 and 3. I like these questions because you don't have to know stuff. That's a good way to go through life, is faking your way through without knowing anything. Let's look at number 4 though. States were represented in Congress proportionally according to population. We know that's not true. Hold on just a second. Other weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. They had to ask the states for money, so therefore they couldn't pay for a military. And they already had debt from the Revolutionary War to deal with. They could not coin a national currency, so there were different state currencies, which is inefficient. They remember they were so inefficient they couldn't put down that uprising called Shays' Rebellion. All right? And that sort of let everybody know, holy cow, we really do need a new constitution.
No military?
They had to sort of ask the state militias for help, and they couldn't pay for their own because they had to ask the states for money. By the way, the states were also in debt from the Revolutionary War. All right? They had no power to regulate trade across state lines. I believe the states were just declaring national policies unconstitutional. State courts were declaring national policies unconstitutional, and so that means if the state didn't want to, they didn't have to follow national rules. And then, of course, they needed unanimous consent to amend the Articles of Confederation, which is impossible, and they needed an unrealistically high 9 out of 13 votes to even pass a law, which is unrealistic. So, there you have it. I'm sure there's others. You should look them up, but I don't have my notes in front of me. All right. I'll see you tomorrow. We're going to answer the questions with a plus on them.